I'm Thomas, a 42-year-old architect with a penchant for order, blueprints, clean lines, and a life I thought was equally structured. My wife, Clara, 38, is a museum curator, her world a tapestry of art and stories. We've been married for 12 years, living in a restored Victorian house in Portland, Oregon, with ivy climbing the walls like veins. Our life was a canvas of routine. Coffee at 7 a.m., her humming Vivaldi while I sketched, and evenings with Pinot Noir by the fireplace. Clara's laugh, sharp and bright, was the heartbeat of our home. But 3 months ago, I noticed a crack in the foundation. Started with her phone. Clara, who once left her screen unlocked, began guarding it like a relic. She tilted away when I passed, her fingers dancing over messages she dismissed as work. Her museum galas, once rare, became weekly, and she'd return late, her perfume layered with something unfamiliar. Sandalwood, maybe, or ambition. I'd ask, "How was the event?" She'd smile vague and say, "Oh, donors and small talk." But her eyes, usually warm as amber, flickered with secrets. I'm not a suspicious man. My work demands precision, not paranoia. Yet, I started noticing her absences in small ways. A lipstick shade she never wore, a receipt for a cafe I didn't know she frequented. I told myself it was nothing. Clara was my constant, the woman who'd once spent a rainy weekend helping me rebuild a collapsed bookshelf. Laughing as sawdust coated her hair. But doubt is a slow poison. One night, I found a silk scarf in her coat pocket. Deep indigo, not her style. It smelled of that same sandalwood. When I held it up, she said, "A gift from a colleague," and changed the subject. I began to watch her. Not proud of it, but I did. Her phone buzzed at odd hours, and she'd step outside to answer, her voice low. I'd stand by the window, the cold glass against my palm, watching her silhouette pace the garden. Once I heard her laugh, a sound I thought was mine alone. It wasn't jealousy, not yet. It was the ache of something slipping, like a blueprint curling at the edges before it burns. I loved Clara, loved the life we'd built. But love, I was learning, could blind you to the fault lines beneath your feet. That night, I lay awake, her breathing soft beside me. The scarf was in my desk drawer, a question I couldn't unask. Who was she becoming? And why did I feel like a stranger in my own home? Clara's museum hosted a new exhibit, Echoes of the Unseen, a collection of abstract paintings that felt like staring into someone's fever dream. She insisted I attend the opening, a rare invitation after weeks of distance. I dressed in my best suit, hoping to reclaim something, her attention, maybe, or the us we used to be. The gallery buzzed with Portland's elite, collectors in tailored coats, artists with wild hair, and Clara, radiant in a black dress that hugged her like a second skin. She moved through the crowd, a conductor of charm, while I lingered by a canvas of fractured blues. That's when I saw him, tall, mid-40s, with a sculptor's hands and a smile that cut like a blade. He wore a linen suit, too casual for the room, and leaned toward Clara as she spoke, her hand brushing his arm. I'm not a jealous man, but my chest tightened. His name, I learned from a passing curator, was Julian Voss, a visiting artist from Berlin, known for installations that redefined intimacy. Clara hadn't mentioned him, not once. I watched them all night. Julian's gestures were deliberate, his eyes lingering on her like she was the exhibit. Clara laughed at his words, her head tilting the way it did when we first met. I sipped my wine, the glass cold against my lips, and felt the room shrink. When I approached, Clara introduced us. "Thomas, this is Julian, our guest artist." His handshake was firm, his gaze steady, but there was a flicker, amusement maybe, or challenge. "Clara speaks highly of you," he said, his accent smooth. I nodded, my throat dry, and wondered what else she'd shared. Later, I found them by a sculpture, a tangle of bronze wires shaped like lovers. Clara's fingers traced the metal, and Julian's hand hovered near hers, not touching but close enough to mean something. I stood frozen, a blueprint unrolling in my mind. Late nights, her guarded phone, that sandalwood scent. Was this the colleague? The scarf's owner? I wanted to confront her, but the crowd pressed in, and she slipped away to greet a donor. Driving home, Clara was quiet, her hands folded in her lap. Good turnout, I said, testing the waters. Julian seems interesting. Her pause was a beat too long. He's brilliant, she said, staring out the window. His work challenges boundaries. I gripped the wheel, the city lights blurring. Boundaries. The word hung between us, heavy as the scarf in my drawer. That night I couldn't sleep. Julian's face haunted me. Not his features, but the way Clara looked at him, like she was seeing something I couldn't. I needed answers, but the truth felt like a cliff I wasn't ready to leap from. I started digging. Not proud of it, but the architect in me needed structure. A plan to map the chaos Clara's distance had sown. I began with her phone, waiting for a moment she left it unguarded. One morning, while she showered, I slipped into the kitchen where it lay charging. Her passcode, our anniversary, still worked. My hands shook as I opened her messages. There, under JV, were dozens of texts, a thread stretching back months. Missed you at the studio, one read. Your thoughts on the piece linger. Another. Her replies were coy. Your trouble? Or, can't stop thinking about it. No confessions, but the intimacy was a blade to my gut. I scrolled further, finding photos. Clara in a loft I didn't recognize, laughing beside Julian, his arm around her waist. Another showed them at a cafe, her hand on his, the same cafe from that receipt. My pulse roared. I heard the shower stop and slipped the phone back. My mind a storm of angles and edges. That sandalwood scent, the scarf, it was him. Julian Voss wasn't just an artist. He was the fracture in my marriage. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more, something undeniable. I started tracking her routine, noting when she left for galas or meetings. One evening, claiming a deadline, I followed her. She drove to a warehouse district, parking outside a brick building with blackened windows. Julian's studio, I assumed. I waited, hidden in my car, as she disappeared inside. 2 hours later, she emerged, her hair loose, her smile unguarded. Julian stood in the doorway, watching her leave. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, imagining them inside. Laughing, touching, rewriting the story of us. At home, I searched Julian online. His website showcased his art. Installations of mirrors and wire, pieces about connection and betrayal. Critics called him provocative. I called him a thief. His Instagram was worse. Photos of Clara at his side, captioned with cryptic phrases like, "Muse of the moment." My wife, my Clara, reduced to his inspiration. I saved screenshots, building a dossier of their affair, each image a brick in the wall of my certainty. Clara noticed my mood. "You're quiet," she said one night, pouring wine. "Work stress." I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The lie was easier than the truth. I loved her still, despite everything. But love was a blueprint crumbling under the weight of her secrets. I began to plan, not just to confirm her betrayal, but to make her feel its cost. Revenge wasn't a word I used lightly, but it was taking shape, precise and cold, like the lines of a building I'd designed to last. The betrayal wasn't what I expected. I'd braced for stolen nights, whispered promises, the cliches of an affair. But Clara and Julian's connection was stranger, more insidious. I learned this one afternoon, tailing her to a gallery downtown. Hidden behind a display, I overheard them talking, not about love, but about creation. "You're my catalyst," Julian said, his voice low. "This project lives because of you." Clara's reply was fervent. "It's ours, Julian. Thomas wouldn't understand." My name, spoken like a barrier, stung worse than any touch. I dug deeper, hacking into her email, a line I never thought I'd cross. There, I found their plan. An installation called Fractured Vows. A multimedia piece blending Clara's curatorial vision with Julian's art. It wasn't just a project. It was a confession. The proposal described a narrative of two souls unbound by convention. Using audio of their late-night talks, photos of their meetings, even fragments of Clara's journal, pages I'd never seen. They'd woven their intimacy into art, displaying it for the world while I, the husband, was the oblivious backdrop. This was the non-standard betrayal. Clara hadn't given Julian her body, but her mind, her creativity, her essence. She'd shared parts of herself I thought were mine, crafting a legacy with him that excluded me. The exhibit was set to debut in a month, funded by a grant Clara had secured behind my back. My wife, my partner, had built a world where I was irrelevant. The realization gutted me. I sat in my study, the indigo scarf in my hands, its sandalwood scent mocking me. I'd loved Clara's passion for art, her ability to see beauty in chaos. Now that passion was a blade, carving me out of her life. I imagined confronting her, shattering her composure, but words felt weak. She'd dismiss me, call me rigid, say I didn't get her art. No, I needed something sharper, a response as deliberate as her betrayal. I began to sketch my revenge, not with pencils but with intent. It would be cruel, not in violence but in precision, dismantling the world she'd built with Julian. I'd use their own creation against them, expose their art for what it was, a betrayal masquerading as genius. I spent nights researching the grant, the gallery, the exhibit's logistics. I contacted a journalist friend, planting seeds of a story about ethical questions in the art world. I wasn't just Thomas, the cuckolded husband. I was an architect of consequences. Clara slept soundly, unaware of the storm I was drafting. I watched her face soft in the moonlight, and felt a pang of love twisted with rage. She'd chosen Julian's vision over our vows. Now I'd make her see the cost of that choice. My revenge began quietly, a single line drawn in the blueprint of their ruin. I started with the grant funding Clara's exhibit. Posing as a concerned citizen, I emailed the foundation, hinting at irregularities in the proposal process. I included anonymized screenshots from Clara's emails, carefully curated to suggest she'd misrepresented her role. It wasn't a lie. She'd downplayed the museum's involvement to secure the funds for her and Julian's vision. I sent the email late at night, my heart pounding, knowing it could unravel their project. The next morning, Clara was distracted, checking her phone over breakfast. "Something wrong?" I asked, stirring my coffee. "Just work?" she muttered, her brow furrowed. I hid my satisfaction. The foundation responded within days, requesting a review. Clara spent hours on calls, her voice sharp with panic. I overheard her tell Julian, "We might lose the funding." His reply was muffled, but her sigh told me he was rattled too. My first strike had landed. I didn't stop there. I contacted my journalist friend, Lena, who wrote for a local arts magazine. Over beers, I fed her a story, an upcoming exhibit raising questions of authenticity. I shared details of fractured vows, framing it as a project exploiting personal relationships for clout. Lena's eyes lit up. She loved a scandal. "This could be big," she said, promising to dig. I knew her article would cast a shadow over Clara and Julian's debut, tainting their art before it saw light. At home, Clara grew distant, her warmth replaced by a nervous edge. She'd pace the garden, phone in hand, unaware I was watching from the study. Once, she snapped at me for leaving dishes out, a small thing that felt like a crack in her facade. I played the oblivious husband, asking, "Everything okay at the museum?" She forced a smile. "Just a busy season." I nodded, my mind on the next phase. I began to sabotage Julian's reputation. Using a burner account, I posted on art forums, questioning his past project's ethics. Hadn't he once used a collaborator's work without credit? The threads gained traction, and soon, whispers of Julian Voss controversy appeared online. I watched Clara read one, her face paling. "People are so vicious," she said, unaware I was the viper. Each move was calculated, a brick in the structure of their downfall. Yet, as I watched Clara unravel, a part of me ached. She was still my wife, the woman who danced with me in our kitchen to old jazz records. But love couldn't erase her betrayal. She'd built a world with Julian, excluding me. Now, I'd dismantle it, piece by piece, until she felt the weight of what she'd done. The cruelest part? She'd never see it coming. Clara's world began to fray, and I was the unseen thread puller. The grant review tightened its grip. The foundation demanded an audit, freezing funds for fractured vows. Clara spent nights at the dining table, papers strewn like a battlefield, her voice sharp on calls with Julian. "We'll fix this," she'd say, but her tone betrayed doubt. I'd pass by, offering tea, my face a mask of concern. "Tough week?" I'd ask. She'd nod, distracted, unaware I'd lit the match. I turned my attention to the gallery hosting their exhibit. It was a prestigious space, all glass and white walls, run by a curator named Margot, a stickler for reputation. I met Margot for coffee, posing as a concerned donor. "I've heard rumors about Voss's ethics," I said, dropping hints about his exploitative collaborations. I mentioned Lena's upcoming article, framing it as industry chatter. Margot's eyes narrowed. She valued her gallery's prestige above all. "I'll look into it," she said, her tone clipped. I knew she would. That evening, I hacked into Julian's email. His password, predictably, was a variation of his first installation's title. I found correspondence with Clara, plans for the exhibit, but also personal notes. "You're the pulse of this," he wrote. Her reply, "I've never felt so alive." My stomach twisted. This wasn't just art. It was a theft of her spirit, the part I'd loved most. I forwarded select emails to Margot, anonymized, suggesting Julian was using Clara's influence for personal gain. It was a half-truth, but truth wasn't my goal, disruption was. Clara came home late, her face drawn. "The gallery's hesitating," she said, pouring wine. "Margot's asking questions." I feigned surprise. "About what?" She shrugged, but her hands trembled. I saw Julian's shadow in her worry, and it fueled me. I wasn't just dismantling their project. I was erasing the world they'd built without me. Yet, as I watched her sip her wine, her eyes distant, I felt a pang. She was still Clara, the woman who'd once sketched my portrait in charcoal, laughing at her smudged fingers. But that Clara was gone, replaced by someone who'd chosen Julian's vision over our life. I lay awake, plotting my next move. The exhibit was weeks away, and I needed to ensure it never saw light. My revenge wasn't about confrontation. It was about precision, like designing a building to collapse under its own weight. I'd make Clara and Julian face the void of their choices, and I'd do it without them ever knowing my hand. The architect in me thrived on control, even as my heart cracked. Lena's article dropped like a stone in still water. Titled "Art or Exploitation?" Questions swirl around Voss's latest. It ran in the arts magazine and spread online. It didn't name Clara directly, but painted Julian as a manipulator, using personal relationships to fuel his work. The piece cited anonymous sources, my emails, and referenced the grant audit. Social media erupted, with art blogs dissecting fractured vows as a potential sham. I watched Clara read it on her laptop, her face paling. "This is unfair," she whispered, unaware I was the storm's architect. The gallery called an emergency meeting. I knew because I tapped into Clara's calendar, a violation that felt justified by her betrayal. She left the house in a rush, her coat misbuttoned. I followed at a distance, parking near the gallery. Through the glass, I saw her with Julian and Margot, their gestures tense. Julian's hands waved, defensive. Clara's head hung low. Margot stood like a judge, arms crossed. I imagined her ultimatum: clean up the mess or lose the space. My chest tightened, not with guilt, but with the thrill of control. I amplified the chaos. Using my burner account, I seeded comments on art forums, linking to Lena's article and questioning Clara's role. "Is the curator complicit?" I wrote, careful to sound impartial. The threads exploded, with strangers speculating about her ethics. I didn't want to destroy Clara, not entirely, but she needed to feel the weight of her choices. She'd woven her soul into Julian's art, leaving me as collateral. Now I was rewriting the narrative. At home, Clara was a ghost. She barely ate, her eyes red from sleepless nights. The exhibit might be cancelled, she told me, her voice hollow. Years of work gone. I nodded, stirring my coffee. That's rough. Can you fight it? She shook her head. The rumors are everywhere. I hid my smirk. Rumors I'd planted. Now vines choking her dreams. Yet her pain gnawed at me. I remembered our honeymoon in Florence. Her awe at the Uffizi's paintings. That Clara felt so far away. I planned my next strike. The exhibit's physical components. Julian's studio held the installation, wires, mirrors, and audio files of their talks. I'd seen the address in Clara's emails. Destroying it outright was too crude. I needed subtlety. I contacted a contractor friend, posing as a gallery rep, and arranged an inspection for code violations. The warehouse district was strict. A single flag could shut the studio down. As I sent the email, I felt like a draftsman, my lines sharp and deliberate. Clara and Julian would lose their art, their bond, their legacy. And I'd watch, the husband they'd underestimated, as their world crumbled. The studio inspection was my sharpest cut yet. I'd learned from Clara's emails that Fractured Vows was stored in Julian's warehouse, a fragile assembly of mirrors and wires, their masterpiece awaiting its debut. My contractor friend, unaware of my motives, flagged the building for electrical issues, loose wiring, outdated permits. The city moved fast, slapping a cease-use order on the space. Julian couldn't access his studio, and the installation was trapped inside, at risk of damage if movers weren't cleared. Clara came home furious, slamming her bag on the counter. The city's shut down Julian's studio, she said, her voice cracking. Our work's stuck, and the gallery's pulling out. I leaned against the fridge, feigning shock. How'd that happen? She paced, her hands in her hair. Some anonymous tip about violations. It's sabotage. I swallowed a laugh. Sabotage, yes, but hers was the first betrayal. Handing her heart to Julian, weaving me out of her life. I monitored the fallout online. Art forums buzzed with speculation. Was Voss cursed? Was the curator negligent? Clara's name surfaced now, her reputation bruised. She spent hours on the phone, pleading with Margot, then Julian. I overheard her say, "We can salvage this, can't we?" His reply was sharp, accusing her of mishandling the grant. Their alliance was cracking, just as I'd planned. I felt a dark satisfaction, like aligning a blueprint's final beam. But Clara's unraveling hurt more than I expected. One night, she sat on the couch, staring at a blank TV, a glass of wine untouched. "I've lost everything," she said, not looking at me. I wanted to snap, "You lost me first," but I stayed silent. Her betrayal wasn't physical, but it was deeper. She'd given Julian her creative soul, her passion, her dreams. Now ash. I'd loved that fire in her. Now I was snuffing it out, and it left a bitter taste. I pushed forward. I leaked audio snippets from their installation. Clara's voice, intimate, discussing breaking free with Julian to Lena. She published them, framing them as proof of exploitation. The art world recoiled. Clara's museum put her on leave. She cried in our bedroom, unaware I'd orchestrated it all. I held her, my arms a lie, my heart a furnace of rage and regret. My revenge was a perfect structure, but it was hollowing me out. I needed one final blow to finish it, something to make them feel my erasure. The architect in me demanded completion. Clara's museum leave was the penultimate stroke in my plan, but I wasn't done. The exhibit was dead, Julian's reputation in tatters, and Clara's career teetering, but I needed a finale, a public humiliation to mirror the private one they'd inflicted on me. I designed it with the precision of a cathedral's blueprint, every angle calculated to expose their betrayal without implicating myself. I orchestrated a public event, a community forum on art ethics, hosted by a local cultural center. I used Lena as a conduit, suggesting it as a follow-up to her article. She invited Clara and Julian as panelists, framing it as a chance to clear the air. They agreed, desperate to salvage their names. I ensured the audience included art critics, colleagues, and donors, all primed by whispers of scandal. I'd hacked their installation's full audio, editing it to highlight Clara's confessions of needing more than her marriage. I planned to leak it during the forum, projected on a screen for all to hear. The night before, Clara sat in our kitchen, practicing her speech. "I can fix this," she said, her voice fragile. I nodded, my chest tight. She looked small, not the vibrant woman who'd once debated Monet with me over breakfast. I almost faltered, but then I remembered her emails, her laughter with Julian, the scarf's sandalwood scent. She'd erased me from her story. This was justice. I arranged for a tech contact to handle the audio leak, keeping my hands clean. The forum was set for a Friday, the cultural center packed with Portland's art scene. I attended, blending into the crowd, my pulse steady. Clara and Julian sat on stage, pale but composed, answering questions about artistic integrity. Then, the audio played, Clara's voice, raw, saying, "Thomas doesn't see me anymore. You do." The room gasped. Julian froze. Clara's face crumpled, her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for an escape. The moderator scrambled to cut the feed, but the damage was done. Whispers spread. Donors left early. Lena cornered Clara afterward, pressing for comment. Julian slipped out, abandoning her. I watched from the back, a shadow in my own triumph. Clara drove home alone, and I found her later, sobbing in our garden. "How did this happen?" she asked. I shrugged, my voice soft. "Truth comes out, I guess." Inside, I was a storm, pride, guilt, and loss colliding. The forum was the final crack. Clara's museum let her go quietly. Julian left Portland, his career a husk. Their art was forgotten, a footnote in a scandal. I'd won, but victory felt like a blueprint drawn in ash. Clara stayed in our house, a ghost of herself, and I wondered if I'd destroyed us both. The dust settled, but my victory was a hollow frame. Clara withdrew, spending days in our guest room, her eyes dull, her curator's spark extinguished. The museum's severance was polite, but Portland's art scene shunned her. Julian vanished to Berlin, his Instagram silent, his name a cautionary tale. Fractured Vows was dismantled, its pieces sold off or scrapped. I'd raised their world, but the rubble buried parts of me too. I expected relief, even joy, but found neither. Clara's betrayal had been intellectual, emotional, a theft of her essence, but my revenge was surgical, stripping her identity. I'd planned every move like a perfect elevation drawing, yet the structure felt unstable. Nights were the worst. I'd lie beside her, her breathing uneven, and remember our early days. Road trips to the coast, her sketching lighthouses while I napped. That Clara was gone, and I'd helped erase her. The community whispered about the scandal, but I stayed above suspicion. Lena's articles never traced back to me. The grant audit was bureaucratic noise. The studio closure, a city quirk. I was the invisible draftsman, my lines clean. Yet Clara's pain was a mirror. She'd stop mid-sentence, staring at nothing, or leave half-finished emails open, job applications to small galleries. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said once, her voice a wound. I wanted to scream, "You did this first," but silence was safer. I tried rebuilding us. I cooked her favorite risotto, suggested walks in Forest Park. She'd nod, but her smiles were ghosts. I wondered if she suspected me. The scarf, the dossier, the forum, had she pieced it together? Her eyes held no accusations, only defeat. That was worse. My revenge was meant to balance the scales, not tip them into this void. I began to question my design. Had I miscalculated her betrayal's depth? Was her connection with Julian a symptom, not the disease? One evening, I found her journal, left open on the couch. Pages detailed her shame, her loss, but also her love for me. Past tense, a relic. "Thomas was my anchor, but I needed wings," she wrote. I closed it, my throat tight. Wings I couldn't give, so she'd found Julian. My revenge hadn't just punished her. It had proven her right. I was rigid, controlling, a man who'd built a cage instead of a home. The architect in me saw the flaw too late. My plan was flawless, but the foundation, our marriage, was already cracked. Now, I faced the final question. Could I live with the structure I'd created, or would I need to tear it down myself? The house felt like a blueprint abandoned mid-draft. Clara moved through it like a shadow, her curator's confidence replaced by a quiet resignation. She'd taken a job at a small gallery, cataloging prints, a far cry from her museum days. I watched her pack her lunch each morning, her movements mechanical, and felt no triumph. My revenge had been a masterpiece of precision. Grant audits, studio closures, public shaming. But its cost was this. A marriage reduced to echoes, a wife I'd loved now a stranger. I tried to reconnect. Let's take a weekend away, I suggested, picturing the Oregon coast, where we'd once collected sea glass. Clara's eyes met mine, searching, then dropped. Maybe, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I wondered if she sensed my hand in her downfall. The indigo scarf, still in my desk, was a relic of my obsession. Its sandalwood scent faded. I'd burned her world to ash, but mine was smoldering too. Online, the art world moved on. Julian's name was a footnote, Clara's a cautionary tale. Lena's articles had sparked debates about ethics, but no one traced the chaos to me. I was the unseen architect, my lines invisible. Yet victory felt like a miscalculation. I'd wanted Clara to feel my pain, to understand the theft of her giving Julian her creative soul. Instead, I'd stripped her of everything, her passion, her identity, her fire. The architect in me saw the flaw. I designed a punishment, not a path forward. One night, Clara left her laptop open. An email draft to a friend read, "I don't know if I can stay here. Thomas is kind, but I'm lost." My chest tightened. Kind. The word mocked me. I'd been cruel, not kind, dismantling her life with surgical precision. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. Love lingered, a stubborn root, but it was tangled with guilt. I'd won, but at what cost? The house, once alive with her Vivaldi hums, was a mausoleum of our past. I began to question my next step. Could we rebuild? Or was the foundation too cracked? Clara's betrayal had sparked my revenge, but mine was the greater sin. I'd erased her to prove a point. The final phase of my plan wasn't more destruction. It was deciding whether to confess, to let her see the blueprint of my rage, or to let her go, freeing us both from this hollow structure. The architect in me demanded a resolution, but the husband in me feared the truth. I couldn't live in the silence anymore. Clara's distance, her hollow eyes, were a mirror to my own unraveling. My revenge had been cruel, a cathedral of consequences, but it left me as empty as her. I decided to confess, not for absolution, but because the truth was the only way to break the cycle of our mutual destruction. I chose a Saturday, the house quiet, rain tapping the windows like a metronome. "Clara, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands folded, wary. I took a breath and laid out the blueprint. The scarf that sparked my suspicion, the texts I'd found, the emails, the studio sabotage, Lena's articles, the forum audio. I spared no detail, my words a draftsman's lines, precise and unyielding. "I did it all," I said. "I destroyed your exhibit, your career, Julian's reputation. Because you gave him what was ours." Her face shifted, shock, then recognition, then something colder. "You knew about Julian?" she whispered. I nodded. "Not your body, Clara. Your mind, your passion. You built a world with him and left me out." Her eyes welled, but she didn't cry. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "Julian saw my work in a way you never did. You loved my art, but you didn't understand it." The words cut, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She stood, pacing, her voice rising. "You ruined me, Thomas. My career, my purpose. You didn't just punish me. You erased me." I wanted to argue, to say her betrayal was the first blow, but her pain was a mirror to mine. "I loved you," I said, my voice breaking. But you chose him. She stopped, her back to me. And you chose revenge. The silence was a chasm, our marriage a blueprint torn in half. Clara didn't scream or leave. She sat again, her gaze steady. What now? She asked. I had no answer. I'd planned every strike but not the aftermath. I don't know, I admitted. I thought the truth would fix something. She laughed, bitter. It just shows how far we've fallen. We sat there, the rain louder than our thoughts, two architects of our own ruin. My confession hadn't rebuilt us. It had exposed the fault lines we'd both ignored. The cruelty of my revenge wasn't just in its execution, but in its permanence. We couldn't unbuild what we'd done. Clara didn't leave immediately, but the confession changed everything. We lived like roommates, polite but distant. Our conversations limited to logistics. Bills, groceries, the mundane scaffolding of a broken life. She stopped working at the gallery, taking online courses in art history, a quiet attempt to reclaim herself. I watched her, torn between guilt and resentment. My revenge had been a perfect design, but it left no room for us. I tried to make amends, small gestures. An art book left on her desk, a playlist of Vivaldi. She'd nod, but her eyes held no warmth. I saw Julian's shadow in her withdrawal, not as a lover but as a symbol of what I'd failed to be. A partner in her creative world. My blueprints, my order had stifled her. Her betrayal was her escape, and my revenge was my cage. The architect in me hated the irony. One evening, she spoke. I'm applying to a program in Chicago, she said, her voice calm. A master's in curatorial studies. I need to start over. My heart sank, but I nodded. When? She looked away. 6 months, maybe less. The timeline was a deadline, our marriage a project nearing cancellation. I wanted to fight, to beg her to stay, but the cruelty of my actions held me back. I'd burned her world. I had no right to anchor her now. I began to unravel my own role. I contacted Lena, anonymously, retracting the sources that fueled her articles. It was too late to undo the damage, but it eased my conscience. I donated to the Cultural Center, funding a new ethics forum, a quiet apology to the community I'd manipulated. These were small lines in a new blueprint, one not of revenge but of accountability. Clara noticed nothing, her focus on her future, a world without me. Nights were my reckoning. I'd sit in my study, the scarf in my hands, its scent gone. I'd loved Clara's fire, her chaos, but I'd tried to contain it. And when she sought freedom with Julian, I'd punished her for it. My revenge was cruel because it was total. I hadn't just stopped her betrayal, I'd erased her identity. Now, I faced the cost. A life without her laughter, her sketches, her hums. The house was a shell, and I was its ghost, haunting my own design. I began to plan for her departure, not with malice but with acceptance. I'd let her go not as punishment, but as the only way to unbuild the pain we'd both caused. The architect in me saw it clearly. Sometimes the bravest design is to let the structure fall. Clara's preparations for Chicago became the rhythm of our days. She packed books, sorted her sketches, and spoke of her program with a cautious hope I hadn't seen in months. I helped where I could, carrying boxes, booking her flight, each act a silent apology. The cruelty of my revenge lingered, a stain on our history, but I was learning to live with it, like a draftsman accepting a flawed line. One afternoon, she found the scarf in my desk. She held it up, her brow furrowed. "Why keep this?" she asked. I froze, the truth too heavy. "It was a reminder," I said finally, "of what I thought I'd lost." She studied me, her eyes sharp. "You lost me when you chose control over trust." The words landed like a hammer, but I didn't argue. She was right. Her betrayal had been a cry for freedom. Mine was a blueprint of possession. We talked more in those final weeks than we had in years. Not about Julian or the exhibit, but about us, our early days, our dreams, our failures. "I wanted to be seen," she said one night, sipping tea. "Not just loved, but understood." I nodded, my throat tight. "I wanted to be enough." We weren't reconciling, but we were dismantling the walls, brick by brick, to understand the collapse. I gave her the house. Sell it, keep it, whatever you need, I said. She protested, but I insisted. It was my last gesture, not of guilt but of release. I'd moved to a smaller place, a new canvas for my life. The architect in me craved a fresh start, a design untainted by revenge or betrayal. Clara deserved that too, in Chicago, where she could rebuild her fire. The night before her flight, we sat on the porch, the ivy rustling in the wind. "I'm sorry," I said, the words raw, "for what I did." She looked at me, her face soft. "I'm sorry too, for what I didn't say." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was enough. We'd both been architects of pain, her betrayal sparking my revenge extinguishing her light. Now, we were letting go, not as enemies but as survivors of our own flawed designs. She left at dawn, her suitcase by the door. I didn't watch her car pull away. Instead, I sat in the empty house, the silence a new blueprint. The cruelty of my revenge had been its totality, but the cruelty of love was its persistence. I'd always carry Clara, not as a wound, but as a line in my story, one I'd draw differently next time. 6 months later, I'm in a loft downtown, its bare walls a canvas for a life I'm still drafting. My work thrives. Blueprints for community centers, spaces that breathe connection. The architect in me has softened, less obsessed with control, more open to chaos. Clara's absence is a quiet ache, but it's not regret. Our marriage was a structure we both failed. Her betrayal a crack, my revenge a demolition. We're better apart, building separate lives. I hear from her indirectly. A colleague mentioned her Chicago program, how she's curating again. Small exhibits that spark debate. Her fire's returning, and I'm glad. I don't follow her online. Too many ghosts. But I imagine her sketching, humming Vivaldi, free from my rigid lines. Julian's name fades, his art forgotten, a casualty of my design. I feel no pride in that, only a lesson. Destruction is easy, creation is harder. I've changed. I take art classes, not to understand Clara's world, but to see beyond my blueprints. I paint clumsy strokes of color and laugh at my mistakes. I date, cautiously, a woman who loves jazz and doesn't mind my silences. She's not Clara, and that's the point. Love, I'm learning, isn't ownership. It's a shared sketch, open to revision. The scarf is gone, donated to a thrift shop. It's sandalwood a memory. My dossier, the emails, the screenshots, I deleted them, a digital purge. The architect in me craves clean lines, but the man in me knows scars are part of the design. Clara's betrayal taught me I could be unseen. My revenge taught me I could be cruel. Both were flaws, but they built me anew. One night, I find a postcard in my mailbox. No return address. It's a Chicago gallery, advertising Clara's latest exhibit, Unbound Lines, a study of freedom in art. On the back, in her handwriting, is one word, thanks, for the house, maybe, or for letting her go. I pin it to my wall, not as a trophy but as a reminder. We were architects of pain but also of growth. Her betrayal and my revenge were the fire. This is the forge. I step outside, the city alive with lights. Portland feels different now, less a cage, more a canvas. I'm not healed, not whole, but I'm drafting something new. A life where love doesn't demand control, where betrayal doesn't spark destruction. The architect in me sees it clearly. The best designs evolve, imperfect but alive, and I'm finally ready to build.